Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Could we in fact be at war with Russia by next year? That's the alarming premise of a new book written by General Sir Richard Sheriff, who recently retired as NATO's Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 and annexed Crimea in 2014. So could the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia be next in line for Moscow? As all three countries are NATO members, if any one of them were attacked, the rest of NATO would be drawn into a war with Russia. The recent Russian bombing campaign in support of President Assad in Syria has again underlined President Putin's ability to wrong-foot the West. But it's not just the Middle East. The financier George Soros has warned that President Putin's aim is to, quote, foster the EU's disintegration. Resurgent Russian nationalism and aggression is one of the grave security challenges now facing Europe. That is the assessment of a dozen of the UK's top military figures who penned an open letter in February warning that UK security would be undermined if Britain voted to leave the EU. Well, General Sir Richard Sheriff is one of the signatories to that letter, and he joins me now. Also in the studio is the Defence Minister, Julian Brazier, who supports the Brexit campaign. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Sir Richard. I mean, the title of your book, 2017 War with Russia, is frankly very alarming, and you're not pulling your punches on this. What exactly is your thesis here?
That we face a real threat from Russia, that the dynamic President Putin started with his invasion of Crimea, the invasion of Ukraine subsequently, his call, in a sense, for, not in a sense, but explicit call for Russia to safeguard the interests of Russian speakers everywhere. And of course, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania have significant Russian-speaking minorities. And the danger is that the adventurous work, the tactics that he's used, and we've seen before, could be extended into the Baltic states. And as your report said, if that happened, that means war with NATO. And not only that, but it means nuclear war as well.
But do you expect him to try it on with the Baltic states?
No, I think that it is highly likely. I don't know precisely, of course, what is in his mind, but the story and the purpose of writing the book as I have is to lay out the potential dangers so that the necessary deterrent measures can be put in place by NATO to offset such a risk.
And, I mean, what is your assessment of a likelihood of that war on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say, and how could it turn nuclear?
I think that unless deterrence is put in place, the necessary forward presence, for example, in the Baltic states, this is a very high probability, if not a racing certainty, given the nature, the dynamic, the nature of the man, the dynamic that he started. I think there's a real concern. And the point of the book is that issue a sort of wake-up call, in a sense, to make people realize that the peace we have enjoyed in Western Europe for 70 years is not something we can take for granted.
Julian Brazier, you heard that wake-up call. Do you share it?
I think
War with Russia?
I think that Sir Richard is absolutely right that there is a serious threat from Russia. I don't think we're on the brink of war with them, but the Prime Minister and the government have taken this very seriously. It was us, the NATO summit in 2014, who called for European countries to raise their defence spending. We have the next summit later on this year in Warsaw, right up next to the Baltic states. We were almost the first country to get air presence into the Baltic states after the Georgian crisis broke.
But Sir Richard also writes, if I'm correct, that the British government has emasculated British armed forces, that you've weakened our defence capabilities. So we're not better prepared to deal with any potential threat from Russia today
Well,
than
this
we were.
last SDSR, the one that we had last year, was in fact the first one for generations, which has involved a small increase rather than a reduction in the armed forces. We're now committed to 2%. We're on an increased pathway. We're building 2 major aircraft carriers. We're increasing the size of the Air Force. These are all steps in the right direction. But what we really need to do is get the rest of Europe to pull its weight.
Okay. So briefly, you're the soldier. Are you convinced by what you just heard from the Defence Minister?
Well, I hear what the Minister says, of course. But the reality is that I don't believe that British defence has. I think the cuts have been so deep into the bone, not just the muscle, that it's going to take a lot more than 2% just to rebuild lost capabilities. And once you lose capabilities, once you lose the ability, for example, to put a division out of the door to fight, that takes an awful lot of effort to rebuild.
Okay, so if we I just want to move on to Brexit quickly, because that's another huge topic and I'm running out of time. You're against Brexit. Is it going to make us less safe if we vote to leave?
The challenges Europe faces from Russia and more broadly from the periphery of chaos around Europe, from the Middle East to North Africa, need strong international institutions like NATO, which of course is the preeminent organization for guaranteeing the defense of Russia, of the West. But also, the European Union is really important because the security challenges we face are so multifaceted that they need the soft power of the EU. And I'll give you a good example. I was in Estonia last week. The EU is spending around about 70 million euro in Narva to address the social deprivation of that largely Russian-speaking city. That's exactly the message that needs to be sent to Russian-speaking Estonians to ensure they recognize the value of remaining EU citizens. So weaken the EU, we're all less safe.
Okay.
Well, I agree with Sir Richard that NATO is our preeminent defence. That has guaranteed our safety for 70 years. The only time the EU has led on an intervention in a military sense was in the Balkans, and that was a disaster, and 2 years later NATO had to go in to sort it out. But the immediate thing, as Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, has just pointed out, is that by opening the borders, the visa regime, to 75 million Turks, even the EU itself admitted yesterday this has security consequences.
But the fact that the two most prominent voices out there who are egging us on for Brexit are Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, does that not give you some pause for thought?
They're both entitled to their views, but
doesn't that worry you a bit?
Mr. Putin, as a former head of the KGB, has a very long history of saying one thing when he means another. What matters to him is the strength of NATO, not what happens within the EU.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Big topic, but we can't go on. Julian Brazier, Sir Richard Shove, thank you very much indeed.
I've been getting away with it.